Living with the Himalayan Masters by Swami Rama. Chapter 6. Should I get married? When I was in Uttar Pradesh, a northern state of India, people would come to visit me in the evenings, and I would give discourses on the Upanishads. One day, a girl who had her master's degree in English literature asked me to grant her an interview. She began by asserting that I had been her spouse in a previous life. She talked for 2 hours, and she led me to a state where I agreed that it would have been possible. I had never had such a personal audience with anyone for a long time before. She tried to persuade me that we should get married in this life as well. Later, I talked with her mother, who also supported her imagination. What the girl said was so enticing, and I was so naive that I started brooding on what it would be like to live with her. I told her that if my master would permit me to get married, it was all right with me. This was the only time in my life when I considered living with someone, though I was not considering leaving my spiritual path. This girl was from a well-known family. Many of her brothers and cousins and other relatives held high government positions. They pressed me to marry her. For 1 year, I was strongly influenced by my emotions. It was a bad period. I felt frustrated and unfulfilled, but I was very much influenced by the girl and her family and did not know what to do. The experience helped me to see how a student on the path of spirituality who is committed to the path of renunciation can be disturbed and distracted. Many obstacles appear on the path, but I am convinced that by the grace of the Master and the grace of God, they lead the student to overcome these obstructions. Finally, I went to my Master and I left the decision with him. He never controlled my life, but he would advise me when I needed it. After some resistance and discussion, I always ended up following his advice. My master said, "You have a task, and you have not yet completed it." Having examined and compared worldly companionship and spiritual attainments, and deciding to follow the path of renunciation, you are now letting yourself be tempted back into the world. If you persist and remain within the influence of your current atmosphere, it will take several lifetimes for you to come back to the path. The decision was left to me. But after listening to my master, I decided to break this tie and go back to the path of renunciation. There are 2 well-known paths, the path of renunciation and the path of action in the world. My path was the path of renunciation. One should not compare paths and think one superior and another inferior. I certainly do not condemn the path which involves living and working in the world while having a family. That path furnishes the means of living, but it's also time-consuming. In the path of renunciation, there is ample time for spiritual practices, but limited means like food, shelter, and clothing. The renunciate must depend on the householder for fulfilling such needs. It's not important which path one follows. What is important is the honesty, sincerity, truthfulness, and faithfulness which one has in either path. This particular incident brought some humiliation into my life, because people put swamis and yogis on high pedestals, and they look upon them as demigods. In India, a swami is expected to live apart from society, without worldly possessions, and without any worldly preoccupations. I have met many on the path who live hypocritically because of such expectations. I have heard Western psychologists say that renunciation, and especially celibacy, is aesthetic insanity. To leave it to each individual to choose for himself But it is important. I leave it to each individual to choose for himself, but it is important to mention here that hypocrisy is a great obstacle. Those who observe celibacy do indeed become abnormal if they do not transform their inner personalities. Those who do not have control over the primitive urges should not follow the path of renunciation. The drives for food, sex, sleep, and self-preservation are powerful urges. Each has very strong impact and influence on human life and behavior. Why should there be such a taboo on sex only? In yoga science, all the urges are channeled and directed towards spiritual development. Those who cannot control and sublimate these drives should live in the world and experience their fulfillment in a regulated way. They can follow the path of Tantra rather than renunciation. They can transform the fulfillment of these drives into spiritual experiences. There is much confusion created by renunciates who impose rigid discipline on their student. This often makes the student dishonest and hypocritical. Is such discipline necessary? Conflict within and without are the signs and the symptoms which clearly indicate that one is not on the path of spirituality. After I had renewed my resolve to follow the path of renunciation, my master thought that I was feeling guilty, so he told me to live on the bank of the Narmada River, which flows through central India, and to practice certain austerities there. He instructed me to go to an isolated, dense forest 30 miles south of Kirigat, near Omkareshwar. The river was full of crocodiles, and in the morning and evening several of them would lie on the sand along the river. I lived on the river bank for 6 months without anyone disturbing me. I had only a water pot, a blanket, and 2 loincloths. People from the village 6 miles distant supplied me with milk and whole wheat bread once a day. These 6 months of intense physical and mental austerities were a high period in my life. One day, a party of big game hunters came by, and they saw me sitting in meditation on the sand in the midst of many crocodiles, some of whom were just lying a few yards away from me. The hunters took my photograph without my noticing and sent it to a newspaper. Soon, stories about me appeared in many newspapers. At the time, the Shankaracharya of Karvipatam was searching for his successor. Shankara established 4 institutions in different sections of India and a 5th institution at a place where he spent his last days. The heads of these institutions are considered to be spiritual heads of India and occupy positions analogous to that of the Pope in the Christian tradition. He instructed a few pandits to observe my daily routine from a distance. They stayed in the village at night, and they watched my activities during the day. They also collected information from others about my life. After observing me for some time and carefully investigating my background, they approached me and they tried to persuade me to consider becoming Shankaracharya. That's it. At the time, the Shankaracharya was Dr. Kurtoti, a highly intellectual man and a Sanskrit scholar of high repute. He was a close friend of Tilak, Tilak, an Indian leader and the author of Gita Rahasya. I was taken to him and he took a liking to me. Then I went to my master, and I received his permission to accept the position. After a ceremony lasting 18 days, I was installed as a successor of Jagat Guru Shankaracharya. I received thousands of telegrams from well-wishers all over the world, including messages from the Pope and other spiritual heads. It was a strange experience for me, such a startling contrast to my 6 months of solitude and silence. I was less than 30 years old, and they gave me such a great responsibility. Dr. Kirkoti believed in socio-religious reformation and handed over his files of valuable correspondence with other spiritual and political leaders. I had numerous meetings with various groups and leaders. I had a busy schedule of traveling and lecturing, and when I wasn't so engaged, people would come to me from morning to evening to ask for my blessings. It became very difficult for me. I had no freedom. I thought, I don't get any time to meditate and do my practices. I spend my whole day blessing people. This is not good. I was not happy. My conscience said, you are not meant for this. Leave. So after 2 years, I simply ran away. Without any money in my pocket, one day I had a large mansion to live in and many cars for one man to ride in. And the next day I had nothing but the clothes I was wearing. Wanting to return to the Himalayas, I boarded a third-class section of a train, which was headed where I wanted to go, even though I had no ticket. The people on the train must have wondered whose clothes I had stolen, because I was still wearing the costly garb of the Shankaracharya. When the conductor came, he forced me to get off at the next station because I had no money and I didn't want to reveal my identity. I had never before committed such a crime as traveling without a ticket. I just bowed my head and got down, saying humbly, "Thank you for not prosecuting me." The admirers and followers of Shankaracharya did not at all appreciate my resigning the dignity and the prestige of the position. They felt that I was forsaking my responsibilities. But I had not been happy, and I never returned to that place again. Then I came to my master, and he said, "You have seen how worldly temptations follow a Swami, and how the world wants to absorb a spiritual person. Now nothing will affect you, because you have experienced positions, institutions, and renunciation. People expect a lot from their spiritual leaders. Do what you can to uplift and enlighten the people, but never forget your path."